Which mob is the most racist mob? Which mob is the most evil? Which mob is the most independent versus the richest? Which mob is executing? Which mob is the best mob? Which mob is the most dangerous? Questions that have boggled the minds of every philosopher out there for hundreds of years. Questions that nobody even thought of asking, to which I have the answers to. And today I'm going to answer to some of these questions. Minecraft mobs come in all shapes and sizes, each filling a unique role in the game. Some of them are quite recognizable for their unique characteristics and strong personalities, while others are known for having none at all. I made a list of a bunch of human traits that I'll assign to mobs, whether that means they're loyal, the most corrupt, or racist. Let's see which mobs would thrive in society and which ones would absolutely ruin it. Starting with probably the most debated one on the list, the most racist mob. There are quite a few mobs that dabble into racism in the game, like the Wither that kills anything and everything in its path, but to better figure out which mob is the most racist among them, we should look into the definition of the word racism itself. A quick Google search will tell us that a racist is someone
showing prejudice or discrimination against a person or people on the basis of their membership of a particular racial or ethnic group, typically one that is a minority or marginalized.
This last part is very important because it eliminates the Wither, Warden, and even the Zoglin, because they kill indiscriminately. They don't really target specific mobs, they target anybody. Piglins, on the other hand, will attack you if they catch you wearing anything other than gold armor, which is pretty racist if you ask me, but then the player is not really marginalized. Then there's the Wolf, which seems to attack black sheep, and the Snow Golem, which seems to attack Wither skeletons if presented with the chance to choose between the two, which actually is a myth, to which I might have contributed to, but the one mob that seems to operate under pure racial discrimination is the Evoker, because it will always convert a blue sheep into a red one. And since blue sheep are not particularly abundant in nature, they also check the box for being a minority. Therefore, the Evoker is the most racist mob in the game, and he looks like a cult leader too. Talking of racism, most of the mobs I mentioned might not be racist, but they sure are evil. I asked you guys, and according to most people, the Wither seems to be the most evil mob. But is this really justified? Let's have a look to figure out which is truly the most evil. The Warden, perhaps, because it obliterates anything that dares to enter its domain. Not really, because while the Warden might be evil, he's not completely unreasonable, because you're literally trespassing into his property. It's not like the Warden is going out of his way to come and kill you or anything, for that matter. You went out of your way to step into his territory, which is totally justifiable. What about the Zoglin? While the Zoglin might kill anything in its path that's not its own kind, we should remember that the Zoglin originates from the Hoglin that mutates into the Zoglin when going into the overworld. And while the zombification does not justify its reckless killing, there's possibility that the Zoglin is just possessed by the zombification virus, prompting it to commit these mass murders against its own volition. What about the Wither? You set it free and it repays you by committing mass genocide. The second it is put into existence, its primary goal revolves around exterminating anything, especially if we are talking about the Bedrock Wither, because while the Java Wither, is strong, comes nowhere near the strength of the Bedrock Wither. But wait a minute, the Wither is not really a threat for as long as you don't release it. So who's really evil? The Wither or the player that sets it free for its own self-interest? I have the answer, the Illagers. Yes, it shouldn't come as a surprise that the most racist mob in the game is also a member of the most evil gang in the game. Illagers, contrary to the Warden, will go out of their way to pillage and raid villages while killing its inhabitants and taking hostages in the meantime. Contrary to the Wither, they act independently without needing the input of the player. Contrary to the Zoglin, they seem to act out of their own volition in committing these mass atrocities. And if this wasn't bad enough, they also imprison the poor allays and iron golems. And I don't even want to go as far to think about the things they might be doing to these poor souls. The Illagers are beings capable of realizing that what they are doing is bad, in contrast to the others which might act off instinct. If I had to rank them among each other, then I'd probably put the Evoker at the top, followed by the Vindicator, Pillager, and lastly the Ravager and the Vex, because they're mostly their pawns, as in they don't act independently. Speaking of independence, which mob is the most independent in the game? The mob that is least subject to another's authority and thereby is free from outside control. The one mob that might come to mind right off the bat is, again, the Warden. But how independent is the Warden really? While the Warden appears independent at first glance, it's actually a guardian, meaning its entire purpose is protecting the Skulk and contributing towards its growth. It doesn't roam freely, it only emerges when Skulk sensors detect movement, and it vanishes when left alone. It's essentially a puppet of the Skulk, not truly an autonomous being. What about the Wandering Wandering Trader. I mean, it seems to be pretty self-sustaining. It makes a living through trades and can even evade dangers at night by drinking an invisibility potion. But despite all of these traits, it lacks any means of defense. Well, you might say that he has his llamas to fend for him, but first, llamas are not really efficient at keeping the Wandering Trader safe, and second, it highlights a critical flaw in independence, as he's not really independent if he needs his llamas to accompany him everywhere. The Wither and Phantom both need the player to spawn, hence they are not independent. The one mob left that makes the most sense is the Enderman. The Enderman can roam through all dimensions and can pick up and place blocks, being the only entity other than the player that possesses these abilities. You might say that the Enderman is not really independent because it is bound to the Ender Dragon in the end, but that statement would be disproved by the fact that Endermen can and very often do appear outside of the End, and they don't necessarily seem obedient to the Ender Dragon since, well, they are not peaceful toward her if they happen to get damaged by her. While the Enderman is not particularly peaceful toward the Ender Dragon, nor toward the player if you so much so happen to look in its direction, which is actually the most peaceful mob in the game, the mob that against all odds has remained peaceful and lives peacefully. First, we'd have to turn on peaceful mode to eliminate a ton of mobs that automatically disqualify. Much better. Delete all of the neutral mobs as well, and we are left with all of the passive mobs. Let's eliminate all the mobs that have natural predators and enemies as well. Would you look at that? Striders might not be the most peaceful mob overall, but they sure are the most peaceful mob in the Nether. But which one is the most peaceful among them overall? The top contenders for the most peaceful mob would be the Sniffer, Mushroom, and Ally. While the Ally is incredibly peaceful, likes to dance, and is overall a great companion, it spawns in captivity, and unless freed by the player, they'll continue to live under imprisonment indefinitely. For the Sniffer, they are very peaceful as well, but taking into consideration the fact that they don't naturally spawn and require a player's input, the crown would have to go to the Mushroom. Because not only is the island they spawn on incredibly rare, but hostile mobs don't spawn on the island. That's as peaceful as it can get in Minecraft. It seems a bit greedy to occupy an entire safe haven of an island as a single species, but come to realize that the Mushroom is far from being the greediest mob in the game. To determine which mob is the greediest, we have to establish a clear picture of mobs that deal with wealth or power in one way or another. I can point my finger at the Illagers again and say that they are greedy enough to pillage villages and kill its inhabitants, but there doesn't seem to be a clear established motive behind these actions. Do they do so for wealth? Do they do so for power, or do they just have a grudge against their tan-skinned counterparts? Well, a quick look into the Woodland Mansion will tell us that they like to hoard wealth, but they don't seem to take loot from villages directly. Whether they get it through various other means or not is up for debate, but Illagers seem to be more power and control oriented rather than wealth oriented. They raid villages, suggesting that they want to establish dominance over them. They keep allies captive, potentially forcing them into servitude, and they also imprison iron golems, possibly to parade them around as a sign of superiority. While they check the box for greed in regards to power, they don't necessarily exhibit direct signs of greed in regards to wealth. Villagers, on the other hand, deal with wealth on a more direct sense. While there seems to be a factor of greed involved with them, they just seem to be doing business as usual. Yeah, they might be overcharging here and there, but that has less to do with greed and more to do with economics. The Wandering Trader, on the other hand, charges ridiculous prices for basically useless stuff, essentially exploiting the player's desire for rare but otherwise easily obtained items, if you could call these rare. But again, the Wandering Trader is more of a scammer, if anything, that's trying to do business. Yeah, black market shady business, but business nonetheless. However, the mob greediest of them all is without a doubt the Piglin. Unlike villagers, the Piglin dabbles in bartering rather than the conventional way of trading. I mean, I wouldn't expect anything else from a pig. They're greedy enough to know what players truly want in return for their gold, keeping the good things mostly for themselves while clearing their inventory off of useless items. It's basically gambling, and they're continuously contributing to your crippling gambling addiction to hoard more and more wealth from you. They are so greedy in fact that they won't even let you mine the nether gold in peace. Don't even get me started on the fact that they will also attack you just because you look poor, in their eyes at least, where gold seems to be the status symbol of wealth. Since greed and corruption often go hand in hand, you can argue that while piglins are openly greedy, villagers are more subtly corrupt, manipulating trade and exploiting others for profit. But just how corrupt are they in the broader picture? Corruption is more than just greed, it's about manipulation, deception, and exploitation for personal traditional game. A corrupt mob doesn't just hoard wealth or power, it bends the system, exploiting others or engaging in shady dealings. So which mobs fit this description? The obvious pick would either be villager, wandering trader, or illagers overall. But which one of them is actually the most corrupt? Since the illagers have already been declared the most evil and racist mob, it kind of makes sense that they'd also be the most corrupt, since, well, if corruption is about abusing power, then illagers take the cake. They're corrupt because they rule by force, cruelty, and suppression. They aren't just violent, they have created an entire system of oppression around them. The villagers initially seem innocent. They live simple lives, trading goods and each working their designated professions. But when you look deeper, their shady business practices become evident. They'll sell you the dumbest shit for the most over-the-top prices, and when demand is high, they'll increase their prices like the snakes they are, exploiting supply and demand like a true capitalist, not realizing who they're dealing with. It's like selling weapons to your enemy without realizing that the enemy is going to use those weapons against you. Then they will abandon their previous job block instantly if a better one appears, showing zero loyalty to their trade and further proving that instead of looking to do fair business, they'll jump at the opportunity to make a quick buck. They rely solely on the Iron Golem to defend them while contributing nothing in return. Villagers aren't just corrupt, they're corporate sellouts, exploiting both players and Iron Golems. Unlike villagers who at least pretend to run a fair economy, the Wandering Trader is outright manipulative. I mean, who in their right mind would trade 5 emeralds for a single sapling? This guy sells garbage at premium prices. He pretends to offer rare items under the guise of false scarcity, but most of them can be easily obtained elsewhere. And before you can even process how badly you just got ripped off, he vanishes into thin air. The Wandering Trader is a textbook definition of corruption. He thrives on deception and takes advantage of desperate players. Therefore, each of these mobs embodies corruption slightly differently. While villagers are filled with corporate greed, wandering traders are scammers and con artists, piglins run a mafia-style economy, illagers are corrupt on a political level, running a tyrannical regime. The definition of corruption itself is pretty vague. If we define corruption as systemic abuse of power, then illagers take the crown. Villagers may be greedy and piglins may be violent, but illagers rule through oppression, cruelty, and even some dark magic to spice things up. In a world full of corruption, there's one mob that stands against it. While villagers exploit trade and illagers rule through fear, the Iron Golem exists solely to protect the weak without asking for anything in return. But does this make the Iron Golem the most benevolent mob in the game? Let's have a look at all mobs that in one way or another provide benefits to the environment or the player through their actions. As we can see, there's not a lot of those. Let's start from the least benevolent and work our way up. Snow golems have to be the least consequential. While they try to protect the player by throwing snowballs at hostile mobs, they are sadly very fragile and non-lethal. Sniffers help the player by sniffing out rare seeds, but I'd lie if I said the sniffer is in any way making much of a difference in the world, even if it tries to help. Axolotls help with ocean monuments, which is a bit more noble, but like nobody uses them for this reason, but at least they are willing to do so. Bees, unlike the rest, at least pollinate the flowers and give you something remotely useful. I would say wolves are more loyal than benevolent, therefore I'm not going to include them in this ranking, but it's worth mentioning them because they still have tendencies of benevolence to them. Allays, on the other hand, are incredibly useful, maybe the most practical mob in the list. They are a great addition to your farm and there's no debating about it. You save them from captivity and they return you the favor by being your little item collecting angel, while expecting nothing in return. They're cute, incredibly useful, and they can bust a move. But are they really more benevolent than the Iron Golem? I mean, the Iron Golem literally sacrifices itself for the safety of its creator, ready to fight until its last breath if it means to keep you safe. So does the idea of self-sacrifice make the Iron Golem more benevolent than the ally that might in turn have a more practical use? I'm not sure about this one actually. Let me know in the comments what you think. Being benevolent comes with the downside of being overworked. But which mob is actually the most overworked in the game? The most overworked mobs in Minecraft are the ones that either have endless responsibilities, are constantly exploited by players, or are stuck in a cycle of endless labor. There's no doubt that farm animals are overworked to the brink, bred, milked, sheared, or slaughtered for resources, sometimes trapped in tiny pens or automatic farms, never getting to see the sky. Sniffers only exist because they're good at digging out ancient seeds, but they don't seem to be very overworked because, well, there's only so much you can do with these seeds. Camels and horses only have a single responsibility, transporting the player at least until the player gets an elytra, after which they are abandoned. Straw Dodgers are the taxi of the nether, but they're not necessarily overworked. They at least get to eat their favorite snack while transporting people across lava lakes. Bees go on to pollinate day and night, essentially working 24/7 to produce the good honey, but end up having it stolen by some random player. Iron golems are undoubtedly among the most overworked mobs, having to be vigilant all the time, looking for threats and terminating said threats, often protecting an entire village without having the chance to relax. But in my opinion, the most overworked mob has to be the villager. They are the ultimate bearer of forced labor, having to work all day. Labor laws don't exist in Minecraft, so they're often trapped in tiny rooms or trading halls, unable to move freely while players force them into workstations, often deliberately zombifying them to get lower prices. Literal economic abuse. The villager is easily the most overworked mob. Players treat them like NPC factory workers instead of actual beings. Iron golems come close, being the frontline defense for villagers, while also being farmed for resources. Being overworked might cause you to get depressed eventually, but which mob is truly the most depressed in the game? We can pretty accurately determine this through the actions of a mob, such as in the case of the Enderman. While the Enderman isn't particularly known for being depressed, they might be intelligent enough to actually have an existential crisis. Their intelligence is evident from their ability to pick up blocks in an effort to build something, but they end up not building anything at all. It also snaps at people who look at it, as if it's deeply insecure or paranoid. The Enderman is probably the tragic remnant of a lost civilization, but while we can only speculate in case of the Enderman, it becomes more self-evident in the case of the Iron Golem. The Iron Golem works endlessly to protect a village that doesn't even acknowledge its existence, slowly breaking down over time and often harvested for its body parts. Its red eyes are a big indicator that it's not living a pleasant life. While the Iron Golem at least gets to do a noble job, the Phantom is the literal embodiment of insomnia. It exists purely because players refuse to sleep. It shows up, screeches in agony, gets killed, and the cycle repeats. Phantoms might not be aware of their existence to the point of feeling depressed, but one mob that surely is aware is the villager. Forced into labor, trapped in tiny rooms, and treated as a mere resource, its existential crisis is at its peak. The ghast is another example that radiates depression from its appearance alone. The ghast never stops crying, trapped in the nether like a lost soul literally begging for release. Even when they attack, it feels like a cry for help. While they're depressed enough to cry out in agony, the creeper is so far gone that it blows itself up the second it interacts with someone. The creeper has no friends and no purpose besides blowing up. It even actively avoids happiness by running away from cats, and its perpetual frown is a good indicator of depression. While depression might be a product of isolation, there might be a reason for why they are isolated to begin with. They might just be extremely annoying, but which mob is the most annoying in the game? The one mob that makes your toes curl every time you see it. Let's start with the least annoying in the list and work our way up. Ghast would qualify for the most annoying mob native to the nether. They wail like that one kid on an airplane who's incapable of taking a nap, being annoying even when they're not attacking. And if that wasn't bad enough, if you don't have flint and steel ready at all times, you're one fireball away from losing your nether portal. Oh, and the way they dodge your fireballs, infuriating beyond reason. Witches are another breed of annoying. If you don't kill them fast, you're in for a ride. They'll just keep drinking healing potions, throwing poison, weakness, or slowness potions at you, making it even harder to kill them. There's no worse feeling in Minecraft than being poisoned while trying to fight something that just keeps healing itself. Endermites are unnecessarily annoying, alongside silverfish having the tiniest of hitboxes, giving you a hell of an experience trying to get rid of them. And don't even get me started on the fact that silverfish hide in blocks, and the second you hit them, they summon even more silverfish nearby. The skeleton, or any skeleton variant for that matter, is extremely annoying. They have insane aim, making it hard to avoid being hit by them, and giving you no chance but to kill them. Creepers have to be among the most annoying mobs, being the only mob that inflicts collateral damage. If regular zombies are a slow-moving inconvenience, baby zombies are the hyperactive nightmare that makes you rethink playing on hard mode. Good luck hitting them, because their tiny hitbox practically makes them immune to your attacks. 1 second they're in front of you, the next they're behind you, smacking you at the speed of sound, while you flail your sword like an idiot. Phantoms are basically Mojang's way of saying, go to bed you degenerate. Miss a couple of nights of sleep and suddenly the sky is filled with these screeching banshees. They don't fight fair either, they circle above, just out of reach, waiting for the perfect moment to swoop down and claw at you before flying right back up, mocking you as you swing your sword at thin air. And no, they don't stop coming. Sleep deprivation just stacks them up, so if you've been awake for too long, congratulations, you got yourself a fleet of phantoms. If you thought one was annoying, try dodging 5 at once, while also dealing with skeletons, zombies, and creepers, all because you forgot to sleep. So, We've seen the dark side of mobs: racism, evil deeds, corruption, greed, manipulation. We've dissected their roles, their behaviors, and the way they interact with the world around them. But here's the thing: while some of these mobs might seem to embody the worst traits of our society, they're not the ones truly in control. Who's really pulling the strings in Minecraft? Who's the true master of manipulation? The one orchestrating all these chaotic and sometimes tragic events? That's right, the player. While mobs might have their quirks and flaws, they are ultimately responding to the world around them. But the player has the power to shape this world. They're the ones setting free the wither, enslaving villagers, exploiting every single mob for their own gain, and even building empires on the backs of these creatures. If you think about it, the mobs might just be reflections of humanity's darker tendencies. But in the end, it's the player who decides if they'll follow the same path or break free. Subscribe and like if you enjoyed the video. I'm trying to get to 130k, so if you subscribe, I would appreciate it a lot. See you in the next video.